We need to be able to trust that the kingdom of God isn't powered by our productivity. Instead, it's sustained by his presence. I think about that a lot. There's an inner monologue that I have, and I've talked to you guys before about this. This inner voice that tells me that I'm not doing enough, that I'm not moving enough, that I'm not accomplishing enough, that that there's a win and a lose for the day, and I'm not winning. You know, I'm not doing enough to put my ticket into the winning hat. I remember as a young man, my father was a lot of things. As a Navy chief, he didn't sit much. Now, granted, I grew up in the 80s, and there was just it was a simpler time. We didn't have a lot of the distractions that we have now. And some of my most fondest memories was in the afternoons when I would come home from school. I was usually pretty hungry, and like a lot of kids, I didn't eat much in the lunchroom because, you know, we didn't have a lot of extra money, and so hot lunches wasn't a thing. So usually whatever lunch I had is what I made, and I'll be honest, I didn't make very good lunches. And so I would come home and I would be ravenous, and I just wanted to sit and watch cartoons, eat a little bit of food, and just relax after what I would consider a busy and full day at school. And my father would come home, and he would come home in the midst of all this, and he wouldn't sit down. He would go right into the kitchen and grab himself a cup of coffee. And the two things that my father almost always had on him was a cup of coffee and a cigarette. That was almost like his uniform for being dad. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's who my father was. And he would come home and he would begin immediately on the tasks that he knew he had to do as a homeowner, as a father, as a husband. And he would just get started. My mother would come home from work after being a nurse and doing her nursely things. And she would immediately start making dinner if my father hadn't. And I don't know how they decided who was going to make dinner, but the one constant thing is we always had dinner, and we always had dinner at the dining room table. And so it was a thing that had to happen. And it was almost distracting and frustrating because every so often I would see my father move through the kitchen or move through the living room where I was sitting watching television or eating a sandwich or reading a book, and he would stop and look at me. Sometimes it was a side eye, he'd just sort of look at the corner of his eye, you know, and almost unspoken, there was this thing that passed between us where I felt like he was judging me and I felt like I was being lazy. I don't remember him ever actually saying that to me. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't remember that. But I remember the feeling. And that's persisted most of my later young adulthood and in my ministry, and even now. There are times when I'm in my study, and sometimes I'll just sit and read. I'll open up a book that I'm using as a study, or as a guide for a sermon or a series that I'm working on. Or maybe I'm just trying to advance myself. Maybe it's a book on leadership. But whatever it is, I'm just sitting and I'm reading. And I have to purposefully shut my brain off for about 10 seconds, maybe longer, and remind myself that sitting down, reading a book in my study isn't me being lazy. It's me doing something productive for the ministry and the calling that God has placed in my life. It's hard because I feel like when I'm just sitting there not doing anything, just reading, that I'm losing, I'm falling behind, I'm failing. In fact, I even have a chair away from my desk that I sit in, that I read in, because if I'm sitting at my desk, the temptation's always there for me to jump back onto the computer, check my emails, check my text messages, uh, put another paragraph down on a writing project, or a sermon that I'm working on. I've got to remember that there is there's a holiness and a sacredness and stillness that sometimes just opening up His Word away from my desk, away from my computer, away from my notepad, And just letting him speak to me through his word can be something sometimes the greatest thing I do that day. But I don't always remember that.